I had the water heater guy come over on a Thursday afternoon in October. My wife was in Phoenix visiting her college roommate. She'd been planning the trip for 2 months. Flights booked, itinerary set, matching luggage by the front door the night before. She kissed me on the cheek at 5 in the morning and said she'd be back Sunday. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and watched the Uber pull away in the dark. I'd been meaning to call someone about the water heater for weeks. The thing was 22 years old, and it started making a sound I didn't recognize. Not loud, just wrong, like a low, slow tick that didn't belong. My wife said it was fine. She said I was the kind of person who heard problems before they existed. Maybe she was right about that, or maybe she just didn't want anyone coming over. I called the plumber Thursday morning after she left. A company out of Naperville, the one with the magnetic fridge calendar we'd had since we moved in. The dispatcher said they could send someone by noon. His name was Terry. He was maybe 30, tall, with a clipboard and a flashlight already in his hand when I opened the door. I showed him downstairs. Our basement was finished on one side, carpet, a couch, the old TV my son used to play video games on before he left for college. The other side was storage and utilities. Water heater, furnace, the chest freezer we barely used anymore, and along the back wall, a row of built-in shelving units my wife's father had put in years ago. Floor-to-ceiling plywood, painted white, loaded with plastic bins and labeled boxes and the kind of things you move from house to house without ever really looking at. Terry crouched down next to the water heater and got to work. I went back upstairs to answer some emails. He texted me 20 minutes later. "Sir, I need you to come down here for a minute." That was it. No explanation. I figured he'd found rust or a cracked valve or something he wanted to show me in person before quoting the job. I set down my coffee and went downstairs. He was standing in front of the shelving units, not near the water heater, in front of the shelving units. He was holding his flashlight but not using it, just holding it at his side, and he had an expression on his face that I didn't know how to read. "Everything okay?" I asked. "I noticed something," he said. He pointed the flashlight to the far right section of shelving, the corner where it met the wall. "This unit here, it's not attached to the wall like the others. See the gap?" I looked. There was a gap, maybe a 1/4 inch, running top to bottom along the right edge of the shelving unit, where it should have been flush with the cinder block. "I bumped it moving around the water heater," Terry said. "The whole thing shifted. I didn't mean to, I just—" He reached out and pulled. The shelving unit swung outward like a door on a hinge, smooth, like it had been designed that way. Because it had been. Behind it was a door, a real door, painted the same color as the cinder block wall, with a handle and a deadbolt, and a second lock, a padlock, through a hasp bolted into the frame. I stood there and looked at it. "Is this yours?" Terry asked. I told him I didn't know what it was. That was the honest answer. We had lived in that house for 17 years. My wife's parents had owned it before us. Her father built out the basement himself, did most of the finish work on weekends. The kind of man who kept receipts and square footage notes in a folder in his desk. He died 8 years ago. Her mother sold us the house a year after that, a family deal, below market. We moved in and I'd never thought twice about the shelving units. They were just there, part of the house. I asked Terry to wait upstairs. I stood in front of the door for a long time. The padlock was a heavy master lock, the kind you buy at a hardware store. The deadbolt had a keyhole on my side. I didn't have a key. I went upstairs and called my wife. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted her. "Can you call me when you get a chance?" Something came up at the house. Then I stood at the kitchen counter and tried to think clearly. My wife's name is Sylvia. We met when I was 34 and she was 31. I was a civil engineer with a firm downtown. She was in property management, which I always thought suited her. She was organized in a way that made other people look careless, and she knew how spaces worked, how buildings were structured, where things went. We got married 2 years after we met. Our son Brody was born a year after that. He's 23 now, lives in Seattle, works for a logistics company. Good kid. Calls every Sunday. We had a quiet marriage. That's the word I would have used if someone asked. Quiet. Not unhappy. Quiet. We had a rhythm. We had a life. We disagreed sometimes about money, sometimes about how much time I spent at work, sometimes about her mother, who was difficult in ways I won't get into. But we worked things out. I thought we worked things out. Her father built the shelving units, her father who also built the door behind them. I went back downstairs. Terry had left his flashlight on the floor. I picked it up and shone it through the gap where the shelving unit was still swung open. The door was solid. The paint was older than the shelving. I could see that now, the slight texture difference, the way the white had yellowed slightly under the new coat. The padlock looked newer. 6 months, maybe a year, that kind of new. My wife's father had been dead for 8 years. Someone had put that padlock on the door within the last year. I went back upstairs, told Terry I'd figured out what the issue was, paid him for the service call, thanked him, and walked him out. He gave me a look at the door that I understood. The look of a man who knows he's just walked into something and is glad it's no longer his business. I didn't blame him. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour. Then I called a locksmith. He had the padlock off in under 4 minutes. The deadbolt took another 15. It was old, the mechanism stiff from disuse, and he had to work at it. When the door finally opened, I told him I'd take it from there. He waited outside. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12. There was no window. The ceiling was low, unfinished joists, the same as the rest of the utility side of the basement. It smelled like dry air and something faint that I couldn't name immediately, clean, slightly sweet. There was a folding table against the wall. On it, a laptop I didn't recognize, a small combination safe, a prepaid phone still in its packaging, 3 manila envelopes rubber-banded together, a charging cable, a notepad. The notepad had handwriting I recognized, my wife's handwriting. I didn't touch anything. I went back upstairs, paid the locksmith, locked the front door behind him, and stood in my kitchen with my hands flat on the counter, looking at the backyard through the window. It was October. The maple in the corner had gone orange. We had planted that tree the second year we lived there, bought it from a nursery in the trunk of our car, argued about where to put it. Sylvia wanted it near the fence. I wanted it near the patio so we'd have shade in the summer. She won, which she usually did, and I'd thought for years that she was right, because the way it looked in October was worth any argument. I thought about all the things I didn't know about my own house. Then I went to our bedroom, to the shelf above her nightstand where she kept a few books she'd already read. The ones she went back to sometimes. I found what I was looking for behind them, leaning against the wall, flat, like it had been placed there so the spine of the last book would hold it upright. A photograph. A woman I'd never seen before. Mid-40s, maybe. Brown hair, glasses, standing in front of what looked like a lake somewhere, smiling at whoever was taking the picture. On the back, in Sylvia's handwriting, Sandra. October 2022. I sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for 17 years and looked at that photograph for a long time. I called our family attorney. He'd handled our wills, the refinance, the property transfer when we bought the house from Sylvia's mother. He knew us. He knew us, Sylvia. He picked up on the second ring. And when I finished telling him what I'd found, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Don't move anything. Don't open anything. Don't open anything. I'm going to give you a number to call." The number was a private investigator, a woman named Beverly Holt, who had an office in Downers Grove and who spoke with the calm efficiency of someone who had heard versions of this before. She was at my house by 4 in the afternoon. We went downstairs together. She photographed everything before touching it. Then she put on gloves and opened the envelopes. The first contained bank statements. Not ours. Accounts I'd never seen under a name I didn't recognize, but the address on one of them was ours. Our street, our zip code, our house. The second contained what appeared to be a lease agreement. A furnished apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona. A 12-month lease, signed 7 months ago. The third contained a printed email chain. I read the first few lines and stopped. I needed a minute. Beverly waited. She had that quality, the ability to just wait without making it uncomfortable. I finished reading. The email chain was between my wife and a woman named Sandra Oleska. The emails went back 3 years. They talked about money, about timelines, about what Sandra referred to as the plan. In one email, my wife wrote, "He'll be the one they look at first. That's the point. By the time anyone figures out anything, I'll be gone and you'll be settled." In another, "I've been careful. Everything I've moved has been under the threshold. No flags. Sandra Oleska." The woman in the photograph. Beverly looked up the name on her phone. Then she turned the screen toward me. Sandra Oleska had been reported missing by her husband in Wheaton, Illinois, 14 months ago. I sat down on the floor of my own basement. I don't know how long I sat there. Beverly said it carefully. "Your wife has been using this room as a staging area. The laptop, the safe, the phone. These are exit infrastructure. She wasn't hiding from you. She was preparing to leave. The question is what Sandra Oleska's role was." The answer to that, which we didn't have yet, was the thing I couldn't stop turning over in my head. I thought about the trip to Phoenix. 2 months of planning, she'd said. Flights booked early. Matching luggage. I called Sylvia's college roommate's phone number. I had it in my contacts from years ago. A woman named Peg, who I'd met 3 or 4 times at various gatherings. She picked up on the first ring. She hadn't seen Sylvia in 6 years. There was no trip. There was no visit. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked Beverly, "What do I do?" She said, "Exactly what I'm about to tell you. Here is what happened next, and I'm going to tell you this part slowly, because I want you to understand that none of it was impulsive." That was the thing I kept reminding myself. In the days that followed, when the anger was sitting on my chest like a stone. Impulsive would have been easy. Impulsive would have felt good for about 20 minutes and then cost me everything. Beverly had connections with the Wheaton Police Department through her prior work. She made a call that evening, not to report anything officially, not yet, but to establish a line of communication. We needed to know more about Sandra Oleska before we moved. If Sandra was alive, if she was involved willingly. This was a fraud case and a disappearance case and something the FBI would likely want to touch. If Sandra wasn't alive, it was something else entirely. While Beverly worked that angle, I focused on the finances. I'm an engineer. I understand systems. I understand how things are supposed to connect, and I can usually figure out where the break is. I spent 2 evenings in my home office going through 17 years of joint account statements, tax returns, and investment records. Sylvia handled most of our day-to-day finances. She'd always been better at it, more organized, and I had trusted her completely. I now understood what that trust had cost me. Over 8 years, beginning shortly after her father died and she handled the sale of his business holdings, she had moved money, never in large amounts, always under $10,000, always structured so the movements looked like ordinary transfers, household expenses, a small investment account she said she maintained for flexibility, automatic payments. The kind of thing a spouse glances at and doesn't question because the numbers aren't alarming and you trust the person. The total I could document was $94,000. I don't know if that number landed on you the way it landed on me. I'll give you a moment. $94,000. Over 8 years. Moved quietly, carefully, methodically, by a woman who slept in the same bed as me, who argued with me about where to plant a maple tree, who called our son every Sunday and asked about his girlfriend in his apartment in Seattle. The money had gone into accounts connected to the Scottsdale lease and to a second address Beverly found, a storage unit in Tempe, Arizona, rented under a name I recognized as Sandra Oleska's. Beverly called me on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after I found the room, with news. Sandra Oleska was alive. She had been located in Scottsdale. She had not been kidnapped. She had not been harmed. She had, in fact, been living in the furnished apartment on the lease I'd found in my basement under an assumed name, waiting. Wheaton PD had located her through a credit card trace. When they knocked on her door, she thought it was someone else. She opened it, saw the badges, and sat down on the floor of her kitchen and started crying. She talked for 6 hours. Her story and my wife's story were the same story, which I will try to explain without letting the bitterness of it distort what actually happened. Sandra Oleska had wanted out of her own marriage. She and my wife had met through a property management conference in Chicago 4 years ago and had become, as Beverly put it clinically, co-conspirators with complementary goals. Sandra needed to disappear convincingly. My wife needed money and a destination. Sandra had connections in Arizona, a cousin, contacts, a familiarity with the real estate market there. My wife had access to money she'd been quietly accumulating and a husband who trusted her completely and traveled enough for work that a long weekend away wouldn't trigger immediate concern. The plan, as Sandra described it, had been in development for almost 3 years. My wife would join Sandra in Scottsdale once she was settled in. The room in our basement, my wife's father's old workshop, which I had never had any reason to explore, had been converted into a staging area. The laptop contained documents and accounts. The safe which Beverly's contact opened contained a passport. Not in my wife's name. The plan had one significant problem, which Sandra described to Wheaton PD between long pauses and careful wordings that suggested she was still trying to protect my wife, even while she was explaining the whole thing. My wife had told Sandra she was going to make sure she wasn't followed. When Sandra pressed her on what that meant, my wife had said, Lewis. That was the name in a video we analyzed, the reference point in our version. She'd said my name. He'll be too busy dealing with everything to come looking for me. I'm going to make it complicated for him. What complicated meant was this. She had drafted a letter, found in the safe, addressed to Naperville PD, dated 2 weeks from that Thursday. In it, she reported that her husband had been behaving erratically, that she was afraid of him, that she discovered he had been moving money out of their accounts without her knowledge. It was detailed. It had dates. It had account numbers, the same accounts she had created and moved money into, now reframed as mine. I read a copy of that letter and I thought about 17 years. I thought about the maple tree. I thought about our son, who calls every Sunday. I did not move impulsively. I called Beverly. Then I called the attorney. Then I spent 3 days doing the thing that neither of them had suggested, but neither of them had told me not to do, which was simply, wait, watch. Let my wife come home from Phoenix on Sunday as though nothing had happened, because I wanted to hear what she said when she walked in. Sunday afternoon, she came through the front door with her rolling bag and her good coat, and the energy she always had after a trip. Not quite relaxed, not quite excited. Something in between. She gave me a hug. She said the flights were fine. She said Peg's neighborhood had gotten beautiful. She'd forgotten how much she liked it. She went upstairs to unpack. I made dinner. Pasta, the way she liked it. We sat at the table and she told me about a restaurant they'd gone to, a show Peg had been watching that she thought I might like. She was fluent. That's the word. She was fluent in the performance of an ordinary Sunday. I listened. I nodded. I asked follow-up questions. I cleared the plates. After dinner I asked if she wanted to sit in the sunroom. She said sure. I got us each a glass of iced tea and I set mine down, and then I said, casually, looking out at the backyard, I had the plumber come Thursday while you were gone. The water heater. Oh, right, she said. How was it? He found something, I said, in the basement, behind your father's shelving. She went still. Not dramatically still. She wasn't a dramatic person. Just a small stillness, half a second, the way a room goes quiet when the furnace shuts off. Then she turned her glass in her hand and said, What do you mean? He found the door, I said, and I found the room, and I found the room, and I found everything in the room. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said Lewis, and caught herself. She'd almost used the wrong name. Her voice recalibrated and she said my name correctly and then stopped. The thing about that moment, the thing I've thought about since, is that she didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She looked at me with an expression I recognized from arguments over the years, the one where she's already working out the angles before she speaks. Even then, even sitting across from me in the sunroom with her glass of iced tea and 17 years between us, she said, That room is mine. My father built it. He built a workshop, I said. You converted it. And I'd like to talk about the passport. And Sandra Oleska. And the letter you were going to send to Naperville PD with my name on it. She looked at me for a long time. I looked back. Beverly Holt has a copy of everything, I said. Our attorney has a copy. Wheaton PD has been in contact with us since Wednesday. Sandra gave a full statement. My wife set down her glass. Carefully, the way she did everything. I'm going to ask you something, I said, and I just want you to answer it honestly once, so I can understand it. Not for legal reasons, not for anything else, just because I've been trying to understand it for 11 days. She waited. Why? I asked. She was quiet for a while, long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, you wouldn't understand. Try me, I said. She looked at the backyard, the maple in the dark, still holding a few late leaves. She said, I stopped feeling like a person here a long time ago. I felt like a function, a role. I wasn't leaving you, I was leaving the version of me that only existed when I was with you. I thought about that. I said, you were going to have me investigated for financial fraud. She didn't answer. You were going to let me deal with police while you were in Scottsdale, I said, under a different name, while our son thought you were missing. Brody would have been fine, she said quietly. He has his own life. I nodded. I said, okay. Then I stood up and went to the kitchen and came back with my phone and set it on the table between us. She looked at it, then she looked at me. I watched her understand. Beverly had asked me before that Sunday whether I wanted her present. I'd said no. I'd said I wanted to do this part myself. She'd said then, keep your phone recording. The phone had been recording since I poured the iced tea. I said, I think you should call an attorney tonight. She was arrested on a Tuesday. The charges included fraud, conspiracy, and, because of the letter with my name on it and the structured financial movements, additional counts that the DA's office had worked out with Beverly and our attorney over the preceding week. Sandra Oleska cooperated fully and received a reduced arrangement in exchange for a statement. Her husband's attorney filed separately. The legal process took the better part of a year. I won't walk you through all of it because the honest truth is that most of it is paperwork and waiting and meetings in conference rooms that smell like old coffee, and none of it feels like resolution the way you expect it to. Resolution doesn't arrive in a single moment. It comes in pieces, quietly over a long time. What I can tell you is that Brody drove down from Seattle the weekend after I told him. He sat in my kitchen and listened to the whole thing, and then he went quiet for a long time in the way he's done since he was a teenager, not shutting down, just processing. Then he said, Dad, are you okay? I told him I was getting there. He stayed for 4 days, repainted the living room which had needed it for 3 years, and which neither Sylvia nor I had gotten around to. We ordered pizza 3 nights in a row and watched bad movies, and I let him talk me into a college football game on Saturday afternoon, which I normally don't have the patience for. The 4th morning, before he drove back, he made breakfast. Scrambled eggs the way his grandmother used to make them, and toast and coffee. We sat at the kitchen table in the early light, and I thought, this is still mine. This kitchen. This table. This kid who drives 12 hours to paint my living room without being asked. Whatever she took, she didn't take this. The house sold the following spring during the divorce proceedings. I didn't fight it. I'd been thinking about a smaller place anyway. Something without a finished basement and built-in shelving and a workshop behind a false wall. I found a condo in Wheaton, 2nd floor, east-facing, with good morning light and a view of the park. I moved in on a Thursday in April, which felt right somehow. I have a neighbor down the hall, a retired teacher named Arthur, who knocks sometimes when he's made too much soup. I have a standing Sunday call with Brody. I have a job I'm good at, and I have that particular kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness but from the absence of something you've been carrying so long you forgot it was weight. I don't think about her often. When I do, it's not what you'd expect. Not anger, not grief, not even bewilderment, though there was plenty of all 3 in the beginning. Mostly I think about the engineering of it. The patience, the years it took to build that infrastructure, quietly, while also building a life, while also being a wife and a mother and a neighbor and the person who argued about where to put the maple tree. The capacity it takes to hold all of that simultaneously. I understand systems. I know when something has been engineered. And I know that the thing she built was, in its own way, precise. She just didn't account for a plumber with a flashlight. Or a husband who, when he finally found the door, didn't panic, didn't run, sat down with it, thought it through, and waited. I didn't need the last word. I just needed the right one. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since that October, not in any mystical sense. I'm an engineer. I think in systems. I think in inputs and outputs, in decisions that produce outcomes, in the chain that connects one action to the next. And when I look back at everything that happened, the plumber, the room, the passport, the Sunday dinner with the iced tea, what I see, clearly, is that none of it arrived without being built first. The consequences were just the structure finally showing itself. Sylvia made choices over 8 years, small ones repeated, consistent. She chose to move money quietly. She chose to build a room I didn't know existed. She chose to write a letter with my name on it. And I really do think that she believed the accumulation of those choices would be invisible. That careful, patient, methodical dishonesty was the same as no dishonesty at all. That if she was never dramatic about it, no one would ever see. But here's what I've learned, and I mean learned the hard way. In the way that costs you something real, you don't escape the structure you build. You live inside it. Every choice becomes a wall. And eventually, someone turns on a flashlight. I think about the things I chose too. I chose to trust without verifying. Not because I was naive. I'm not a naive person. But because trust felt like the decent way to live inside a marriage. And it is the decent way. The problem isn't that I trusted. The problem is that I stopped treating trust as something that has to be mutual, something that has to be earned on both sides over time. I let mine become passive. That's on me. What I refused to do when I found the room was panic. That part I'm proud of, not because staying calm was easy. It wasn't. But because I understood in those first hours that impulsive action would have handed her exactly what she'd planned for. She wanted me reactive. She wanted me flailing and angry and making mistakes. The letter she'd written to the police only worked if I gave them something to look at. I didn't give them anything. Intelligence in a crisis isn't about being cold. It's about being slower than your fear. It's about sitting on the floor of your own basement, feeling the full weight of what you've just found, and then standing back up and thinking before you move. Brody drove down from Seattle and painted my living room. That's what I come back to when the year feels too heavy. That's the part that held. A kid who learned, somewhere along the way, that when someone you love is hurting, you show up and you do something useful. I didn't teach him that with words. I don't know exactly when it happened, but it happened. I think that's the real measure of a life. Not whether things go wrong, and they will, they always do. But what you've built, that still stands after they do. The relationships that hold. The habits of character that don't break under pressure. The ability to sit quietly with something hard and not be destroyed by it. I'm not the same person I was before that Thursday in October. I don't think I'd want to be. That person trusted too easily and examined too little and confused quiet for contentment. I live differently now. More carefully, more honestly with myself first. The condo has good morning light. Brody calls on Sundays. Arthur down the hall makes too much soup. That's enough. That's actually more than enough.